So Tyler was aware of us, then met our manager randomly, and kind of got in touch with us to feature on his record. And
he was doing a project called Dark Knights and Death Metal, which was for a comic book project. Was that for DC? Yeah.
And one of his best mates is Dave Lombardo, and obviously, being huge fans, as soon as he mentioned his name, we kind of snapped at the chance of trying to use him in some way.
That was a funny moment there. We were discussing the track, which was ultimately called Berserker, which we were working on, and we were on a Zoom call like this with Tyler. And I remember I was describing to Tyler, I was like, dude, we got to do this really doomy intro. You know, we should have that classic like Slayer, ride bell, slow halftime groove. And he was like, yeah, I completely understand the reference, but you know what? I know Dave, and I'm working with him right now. Should we just ask Dave? And we were like, yeah. So like childhood dream come to pass in an instant. So yeah, pretty awesome to be able to actually do 2 tracks with Dave now.
Dave's such a lovely guy though. He's like, he's just so kind.
So Milkie, like once in a while, social media does something good. And I forget, like, I think I was just scrolling Instagram or something, and I think it was like, what's that track? It was like Backyard Bastards or maybe Rage All Over. One of their earlier tracks just came up, and I was just like, wow, this is fresh and really, really good. And wouldn't it be awesome if we were looking for another, contemporary female artist to collab with? Like, can't think of anyone better than Milkie right now. So I think we just reached out direct, and it was like an instant connect. And like to hear her sing like that on our track, like, because the style she used in Monster in Paris is a little different from what she does with Wargasm. To actually hear her like exercise her voice in a more melodic way. I mean, there are bits in Wargasm that are like that, but it was just cool to have a big chunk of that. And she sounds amazing. Absolutely blown away. And
she's so fresh, and she's a real rock star, like, naturally. It was real.
And also so lovely.
Yeah, but she's also a really hard worker as well. Like I remember on the Monster in Paradise video shoot, she's like pitching in and carrying my drums back off the stage down to the loadout, and I'm like, oh, you don't have to do that. Like I'm totally got this. It's like, no, I'm cool. So she really pitches in, and she's really kind. So.
Lights has been a perennial presence, throughout this whole thing that we've done on both Fightstar and Gunship, but just always had an enormous amount of respect for her, the caliber of the melodies that she writes. I mean, I don't know, it's probably veering outside of the genre specific, regions that we're discussing, but her collaborations with Deadmau5 in particular, like her ability to craft a hook is really quite astonishingly good. And I can't even remember how we ended up coming to work with Lights, to be honest, at this point. But I think it was just chat over socials, and if we're ever doing anything or whatever, if there's ever a track that's right, that kind of thing. And we had this track, Empress, and hell, she's the Empress. So
yeah, I mean,
why not us?
There's quite a natural fit with Lights and us. I think with her kind of gaming background, she's very grassroots, very hands-on, like produces it herself, and there's quite a synergy, right? She throws axes and she does all this kind of stuff.
Like I always use this analogy, but I think it's a good one. When you're a kid and you get the big pack of felt tip pens, like it's like a big brick in a transparent case, and you get all the colors, and that's cool. And if that's your like palette for making music personally, and then everyone has their own box of felt tips, but when you go and collab with somebody, they've got their own completely unique box of felt tips, and suddenly you've got double the palette, and whatever you're going to create is just going to have different timbres and tones and textures that you just wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. And you also learn, and I guess if you're trying to be a creative and do this for a living and make music that you're proud of, accessing a wider range of chaos and what could come to pass in the final creation is just really appealing from the learning point of view, from the different textures and tones. And Lights is a great one there, because the way she approaches things is just totally different from what we do. But I really dig the way Empresses come out, particularly the verses. It's just not something that we would have ever written ourselves. So yeah, really, really pleased with it. We wanted to do a legitimate sequel for Techno. And so legitimate, what does that mean? We kind of approached it from what happened in the 80s with sequels in film. So, you know, like maybe say Alien, and then Aliens. Aliens was a little, what was the tagline for Aliens? Like, this time it's more, or this time it's war. I forget which one. It's just like take the DNA of the first one and expand it in directions that are wish fulfillment. And so we wanted to sort of get everybody back for the sequel, including John and Charlie, and then trying to write a track that had the musical DNA of the first one, but wasn't too similar just to be a ripoff, was a really interesting writing challenge and was a fun one to wrestle with. But I think ultimately that was a very deliberate, and it took a while to pull that together. And I think only when we felt internally that we had something that was kind of worthy did we approach Charlie and John again. And I think that was just, you know, quick call to Charlie, dude, we're making a sequel, have a listen. I think Chaz, in his classic style, nailed that entire writing process and recording in about 2 or 3 hours. Just came to him straight away. He gave, I think the first thing that he delivered, I don't think we changed it since that we got it. And then with John, it was just, here you go, dude, we're doing a sequel. We wrote him the intro dialogue again. That took a bit of consideration because obviously there's a narrative story there that evolves. And he just, he said this is awesome, and did it in short order. And John is just like the most cool, like genuinely nice dude, you know, just wanting to get involved with us on something like this. I guess is maybe strange for him, but he's just so full of enthusiasm for it, and such a nice guy that whole, both interactions with John has just been absolute dreams come true. I mean, growing up as kids, you know, he's like The Thing and The Fog and Big Trouble. I mean, Christ, we got to meet him and we had a photo where we're all like doing this together, and it was just like, I mean, you know, that's why we do all this, because for the love of all that, you know.
If you're a fan of a band, you kind of want the song you love the most to carry on, and like I do, you know, a lot. Like, oh, I just want more of it, and I don't think anyone's really kind of done it in, like, you know, with the film analogy. It's very much like, you know, in that world, but it's very exciting to try and take your biggest song, because Techno is our kind of most popular song, and do a legitimate sequel that kind of, you know, carries on the story and stands on its own 2 feet, and it's kind of a real continuation, a real kind of sequel, and that was a super daunting task, right? And it was quite a nervous one, but at the same time very exciting in that sense. And so I think it seemed to actually come together, but luckily pretty easily in a way. Like Dan said, like Charlie nailed his stuff like very quickly, and I mean, you know, Charlie's probably the most talented, naturally gifted musicians I've ever known, work with, kind of thing. Like, he's kind of effortless when he approaches stuff.
It really is quite annoying.
Yeah, so yeah, but really nice, you know, kind of gold, like whatever he does, and so we it's kind of nice for us to try and take something that we get from him that's perfect and just kind of push it a bit further, you know, like make it a bit darker or whatever, and, you know, inject it kind of it onto our kind of into our kind of vista. But
plus we got Timmy Cabello on there, which I have to just throw in, because Timmy's been another collaborator across multiple tracks on the album, and he brings a certain je ne sais quoi that, I mean, what a legend. I mean,
pretty sure we do know what it is, though, right? It's not just, well, it's like this, he's just got a kind of style of rock saxophone informed by his kind of long experience that's kind of unique. And I really feel like he delivered saxophone on this album that's on a par with anything from the 80s. I mean, think about like the real big saxophone songs like China in Your Hand, and like, you know, and the George Michael, of course. And, you know, I think like anything on this album that he's done is like comparable. Like, he really delivers solid gold every single time. It's quite magical.
One of the most pleasing parts of making this record, obviously we did everything with Timmy remotely, so we'd write the songs, and then there would be a deliberate gap in the track for where we had imagined saxophone would rock. I mean, in the case of Monster in Paradise, like, I had this real vision where I definitely wanted to create this moment where there was a guitar versus saxophone duel, and sort of building that track and orchestrating those moments in the synthesizers, and then leaving enough space for that to be able to pan out. But sitting back in the studio, sending emails, and then you'd get a delivery from Timmy. And then with trepidation, you'd open the email and have a little listen. And just like every time, it was just like, oh, yeah.
I mean, he's on like 5 or 6 songs now, so it feels like he's kind of part of the band, and he's definitely excited to, play some shows when we kind of get around to that with us.
That's one of the things that struck us when we met him. I mean, obviously we collaborated on the first record, and then on Vocal Day, and then basically a lot more on this album. But we only actually got to meet him in person at the Monster in Paradise video shoot. And I think one of the things that struck us is how he's still so excited and engaged with with making music, with kind of getting involved with us, and in continuing to kind of evolve his own kind of stuff. And it's just sort of amazing to see, really. He's got just so much energy and excitement,
So when we were starting GUNSHIP in the early days, I think maybe I came across a track by Power Glove. Maybe it was on Jason Eisner's movie, nice guy, by the way, Hobo with a Shotgun. And I think it was at that point that I suddenly just realized that what I had heard in Drive, the movie, and Al and I were working with electronic stuff at that time under a different title, and it was the combination of Drive and then suddenly hearing Power Glove, it was oh shit, you can do more of a metal thing with electronic music. And then Carpenter Brut's first EP came out at about that time. I forget what was that track called. It was like Le Perv and Escape from Midwich Valley, I think, were the first 2 tracks that I heard from him. I mean, obviously Carpenter Brut his name is a pun on John Carpenter, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Escape from Midwich Valley, I think, is a reference for Valley of the Damned, is it? Which is also a John Carpenter movie. Anyway, I'm probably misquoting that. But it was the hearing Carpenter Brut in the early days that was definitely a component of the DNA of continuing to do GUNSHIP and push things in this, to have that slightly darker component. So all through the development of the band, that he's been running next to us the whole time, and I have been a huge fan of his since the beginning. And just a chance, and we've often had nerdy chats between us on Instagram stuff about synthesizers and production techniques and stuff. But when it actually came to do a track together, it was just like everything else that we've talked about today. I think it was a couple of messages clicked in. I had written Doom Dance, the verse part, and had a temp chorus part, just said, replace the chorus part with whatever you want to do. And he just, I think it was a day, maybe 2 days he did that in, and we got it back and was just this is killer. And I'm just really pleased to finally, musically connected with him, because all of this is about working with people that you have respect for and you're fans of, and it's just immensely satisfying to be able to do that. So thanks. I can't reveal his name because I think he's kept comfortable with that, but thanks, Carpenter Brut. That was a good one. And I'll talk about Gavin, but I know we did both play in separate bands as kids, Al and I, at school, and I know that we both used to cover Machine Head in our separate bands when we were 15. But going on from there, I mean, what a legend.
Yeah, we'll get Gavin again was a connection to Tyler Bates. Turned out he was a big. They're big friends. They live kind of next to each other in LA or whatever, and they're always around each other's houses. And it was Tyler that suggested Gavin and a few others. I can't remember who, but we instantly were kind of, that will definitely work. He sounds, like you say, he's very unique. There's also a familiarity with the tone of his voice, probably. And that maybe stems back from being kids and playing Bush songs in school bands and trying to simulate that. And so I think that inherently there's a connection there with how I probably sing. I've ended up singing, because when you're young, you're such a sponge, and I think I can definitely notice or probably relate some phrasing and tone that I probably use when I sing to those days, those early kind of inspirations will kind of are burned into you, I think. So yeah, I can kind of thank him for that probably. Also, he does actually sound quite a lot like Charlie, so there's that comfort there, like that kind of raspy, cool tone. And yeah, he and Gavin, he heard the track and he loved it. So you know, and he kind of recorded his parts with Tyler, and you know, it was very, very easy. Like, obviously Tyler's like slick as hell producer, and yeah, and we haven't met Gavin yet. We've had a few messages. We sent him some wine, because we heard he liked wine, but you know, still kind of he's I don't know. Hopefully we'll get to go to LA soon and hang out. But yeah, he was very complimentary about music, which is really, really nice for us, because you know, someone like that to say that they like your music is like a real stamp of approval.
I don't really remember how that one came together. Things sort of blurred in because all of this stuff has taken place over the last few years, so it's difficult to remember the details. But Health are just awesome. I mean, their ability to have power at the same time as atmosphere, and Jake's amazing vocal style is like they kind of stand apart in their production. Like it's so high caliber. Absolutely love it. I think I came across them originally in the video game soundtrack that they did at, is it Max Payne? Yeah, I think it was Max Payne, and just followed them ever since. And I think we had like Blood God was definitely, like, for me it was allowing myself to play in more of the 80s wheelhouse, more of the 90s wheelhouse versus the 80s wheelhouse, sonically and production. And I bought some new synthesizers, like some of the Roland Super JD stuff and things that were like the Prodigy were using, you know, in the early 90s. And I have to admit, like, I was sort of being seduced by that whole vibe during the production of that track. And I don't know, you can probably tell once you hear the track in there that there's definitely that kind of early 90s influence in there. And I'll obviously nailed the chorus parts and the melody. And I think when it came to the verses, we were just like, wouldn't it be cool if we asked Jake? And I think we did, and I think he loved it, and we just went from there. I think that's my recollection. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys.
We've been talking about how great it would be to try and work with Health for a long time, I think. They operate kind of in darker kind of shadow, like not shadows, darker kind of parts of where we sit. So, you know, there's a really nice kind of balance there, I think. And I don't know, I seem to remember, like, I wasn't feeling what I was kind of working on in the verse, and it kind of and when we fired it over to Jake, and he sent something back completely different, like you know, something that I just don't write like that, and so it was not a really nice fresh kind of approach, which was satisfying. But yeah, for me, because it, you know, I do remember kind of struggling to kind of to kind of get the tone right on those parts. So yeah,
we're back to the felt tip pen analogy again, like different pack of pens, you know, and the shades of color mixed quite well, at least in my opinion.
It was just really easy. Like they're sort of this kind of like really powerful force that is kind of quite self-contained, and they can quite happily sit there and, you know, create so much, you know, music over time of such a high standard. But it's also just really effortless to kind of collaborate with them. I think it's sort of like they will work on something and then just share it pretty, you know, in a pretty developed state with us, or vice versa, and we kind of naturally kind of appreciate each other's ideas, so that when, you know, one side develops something and pushes it back across the table, it's like, yeah, it's naturally accepted, and you know, we feel like our styles kind of dovetail very well together. So I think that was another kind of scenario like that, where it really just materialized out of the ether quite kind of seamlessly, as I recall.
Yeah, for a time it felt like where was it going to fit on the record?
Mm-hmm.
It you know, it does feel quite different in its tone and in its kind of pacing, and but I think it was just kicking around for a while, and we kind of just thought, like, this song is so good, it's got to go on the record. It's a bit of a palate cleanser in a way, I suppose. Actually, where it sits on the record, it's like number 8 now. It's like right in the middle, which again was like, are you sure it kind of works here? But I think it really does. And
it's one of my favorites on the album for sure.
Yeah, we were thinking about just releasing it as a kind of independent track, but yeah, it definitely deserves its place. And when we released it like in as like a teaser for the album, kind of at Halloween last year, nervous about how it would be received as well, because it's a bit of a different sound for us, but like really blown away by the response, which was good, because you kind of get lost in your own kind of head, and it's hard, and you lose perspective, and you just, that self-doubt, like I'm I'm constantly imposter syndrome kind of, so it's kind of nice to have a bit of reassurance that actually what you're doing is kind of okay. And yeah,
I actually think that's some of your best vocals on the album. I think you did a really good job there, really good.
Yeah, and the Power Glove were like, oh, we should do it live. I was like, oh man, that's a tricky one to do live. Like, it's a real, how I sing that is quite a different way of singing falsetto. For me, it's like a certain kind of weak tone that's actually quite kind of hard to get to, and I think that's why it sounds different, because I don't think I've ever sung like that before. Singing that live was something. But
Gunship's really always been, the approach has always been, go out and make some shit that you want to hear that you can't find, and it's always driven by what the fuck do we like, and you know what I mean? Like, that's really the primary driver for everything, maybe to our detriment sometimes. Britta, I mean, rewind to like whatever, like mid to late 80s, eating a bowl of cereal, TV's on, you got the 4 channels, Saturday morning, Gem's playing. Gem was a big influence on me as a kid, like particularly the bad band in Gem and the Holograms, what they called, like the Misfits or something. Was it the Misfits? Or am I conflating that? I don't know. I'll get ripped to shreds for getting that wrong, but like, that was a seminal influence, this cool band with holograms and lasers and stuff, and on an impressionable mind is probably a part of why I wanted to be in bands when I was growing up. I mean, let's not forget Pugwall Summer, but yeah. So when the time came around, we had this track that was feeling more directly 80s and more synth pop 80s. Who better to approach than like go bring the voice of Gem back in that setting, because wouldn't it be cool to be able to hear that again? So we're like, okay, let's make that happen.
Yeah, and she sounds great on it. I mean, doesn't she? She's
got a great voice.
Yeah. It's kind of like there isn't. It's a unique track on the record. I think there's not. We kind of only kind of go there once. I think probably it's like a little bit more maybe of the 80s thing than the rest of the record. It's a nice,
And she's absolutely a lovely lady, I must add that as well. And again, an absolutely seamless joy to collaborate with Britta on that track.